A confirmation regarding the audio, please, guys. If you're able to hear me out perfectly well, kindly confirm the same. Thank you. So, hello, good evening to all of you, and welcome to Byju's Exam Prep. Welcome to this webinar session where we shall be holding up the discussion for the prelims test series for the subject of geography and environment, which was held this weekend. Now, here in the span of the next 2 hours, we shall be picking up certain important questions out of that entire set of the question paper, certain conceptual areas from where you have a high probability of questions being asked in the prelims examination. So those are the questions that we are going to analyze. That how is it that we could have reached the solution, and how is it that the thinking process can be shaped. Now, we are not going to hold a discussion for the factual questions. For that, I think you will have the explanation along with you, and there you can add the knowledge to your existing knowledge base. Now, with regards to the questions that we are going to discuss, whenever you have any doubts with regards to any of the problems or any of the concepts in discussion, please feel free to put that up. Our subject matter experts will be at it and will try their best to reply as soon as possible. And when you are posting the doubt, there has been a change in the setup. So mark it as a doubt. Don't mark it simply as a chat. Mark it as a doubt so that your query can be resolved at a quicker pace. So keep that in mind. Having said that, few of the questions I shall be taking up in between wherever possible, but majority of the questions we shall be dealing with after the end of the session for 2 hours. Okay. Now, here we start with the questions and we start with the discussion of the questions one by one. So first of all, we start with the first question. And here the question is from the basic portion of climatology, from the very basic concept of atmosphere. So consider the following statements with reference to the composition of Earth's atmosphere. Now, from this area, UPSC has previously asked questions in the prelims paper, be it in 2018 or earlier as well. So this portion always becomes relevant. Now, let us analyze the option statements. So basically, troposphere contains the majority of the mass of the entire atmosphere. Now, troposphere, that is the lowest layer. Now, that is where the density of air is the highest. Why is that the case? That is because closer to the surface, if let's assume this is the surface, closer to the surface, the force of gravity will be significantly large enough. The force of gravity which will be exerted on the air parcel will be very, very significant and sufficient. As a consequence and a result of that, the air shall be pulled closer to the ground surface. Now, in this situation, what do you experience? You will experience that the majority of the mass of the atmosphere is concentrated in the troposphere. Majority of the water vapor, majority of the dust particles, along with the constituent gases, that is something you will find in the troposphere. Troposphere overall ends up representing close to around 80% of atmospheric mass. Okay? 80% of the atmospheric mass is concentrated in the region of the troposphere. So obviously, the first statement is going to be correct. Now, the highest concentration of dust particles, that is to be found in the equatorial regions. Now, this is incorrect. Why? Because when we talk about the dust particles, their highest majority and the highest quantum is something that you end up finding in the tropical areas, along the tropics. Why is that the case? Because when we talk about the equatorial region, equatorial areas or equatorial region. Now, these areas, they end up receiving rainfall on a daily basis. As a result of the process of convection, almost every day during the time of the afternoon or at the time around 4 p.m., 5 p.m. in the evening, you will find that there has been a formation of a cumulonimbus cloud, and that cumulonimbus cloud is causing sufficient amount of rainfall along with thunder and lightning. So that is where you have daily rainfall which is experienced. Daily rainfall. And what kind of rainfall is experienced? You have the convectional rainfall. Convectional rains. Okay, so that is something that you experience on a daily basis in the region of the equator. So as a result of that, dust particles are not very prominent in the atmosphere, because when the rain will fall, it will carry the dust particles along with them and return them back to the ground surface. Whereas when we talk about the tropics, around the region of the tropics, roughly around 25 to 35 degree north and south latitude, that is where you have the subtropical high pressure belt. That is where you have the subtropical high pressure belt. So where you have the subtropical high pressure belt in existence, that is a region which will generally be drier in nature. Why? Because of lack of rainfall. Wherever you have a high pressure zone, that will always bring about with it a lack of rainfall. Lack of rains. Due to which the presence of dust particles becomes very predominant in the region of the tropics and the subtropics, whereas in the region of equator, you don't experience that phenomena to be in existence. Okay, so that is where the second portion or the second part is incorrect. Okay, now, but sir, for rain, dust particles act as hygroscopic nuclei. Doesn't it mean more? No, see, if let's say in the region of equator you only had the presence of dust particles and they would be acting as hygroscopic nuclei, but no evaporation and no convection current would be happening, then there would be no rainfall at all, isn't it? So higher rainfall is happening because of higher availability of moisture rather than higher availability of dust particles. Okay, right? Then the concentric layer arrangement of gases is observed in the region of the lower atmosphere. This again is incorrect. Why? Because when we talk about the region of the lower atmosphere, due to the force of gravity and due to high density of air, the gases oftentimes they end up mixing with each other. And that is why up till the region of mesosphere, the atmosphere is quite homogeneous in terms of its particle arrangement and the particle distribution. It is beyond mesosphere where the gravitational pull also reduces slightly, the density also is very, very less. That is where you will find bands of various gases in existence, for example, an oxygen layer, a nitrogen layer, etc. And beyond mesosphere, that is why the atmosphere is also what is referred to as a heterosphere, where everything is not mixed properly. So here the third statement also appears to be incorrect. So we have to find out how many statements given above are correct. So the answer shall be A, that is only one statement. Okay? Right. Now, moving on to the next question. Consider the following statements with reference to pressure belts on Earth. Now, equatorial low pressure belts are called doldrums due to virtual absence of surface winds in the region. Now, when we talk about the equatorial area, in the region around equator, let's suppose this is the region around equator. So here you will have generally an equatorial low which is in existence, which we also refer to as ITCZ. So you have large sections of air column which comes in, they start rising up. So if as an individual, let's suppose you are standing somewhere here at a place A, or if as an individual you are standing somewhere here at the place B, you will still experience a surface movement of the wind. But if you are standing where the air is rising up, if you are standing at that location, that is where you won't experience any significant rise of air to be any significant surface wind to be in existence, because there the air is rising up. So here, these are also what are referred to as doldrums, and you have a virtual absence of surface winds in that region. So the first statement here is correct. Right? Now, the subtropical high pressure region is characterized by strong winds and little precipitation. Now, the subtropical high pressure belt, that is what is also referred to as what? That is referred to as horse latitude. Horse latitude. Now, why is it referred to as horse latitude? Because of lack of wind movement in that region. And the anecdotal story behind it is basically a very simple one that you would have come across multiple times, whereby in the olden days, when the mariners and the sailors used to, and the merchants, they used to travel large distances, whenever their ships would approach this region of high pressure, due to lack of any surface wind movement, the ships would stall in that region for longer duration. Now, in order to conserve the resources on board, they would basically end up throwing the horses in the water, and the purpose was twofold. First was to save and conserve the resources. The second purpose behind it was basically to create a large enough splash in the water, and due to that large splash, there would be some movement in the water which would bring the ships into motion. So that is why there in the region of the horse latitude, you have an absolute lack of surface wind, and precipitation obviously is also very low. So here, characterized by strong winds is what makes the second statement incorrect. Then the cyclonic storm conditions are prevalent in subpolar low pressure belt. Subpolar low pressure belt is present where? Around the region of 55 degree to 60 degree, or sometimes even 65 degree, and that is north and south latitude. Now in that region, what is experienced? If suppose this is the region of 60 degree, let's suppose you have cold polar air mass which comes in, and then you have the warm air column from the tropics, from the subtropical highs which come. So here, as the cold air advances, many of the times it simply pushes up the warm air. Sometimes due to convergence, the cold air also ends up rising up. Now, due to that, you have conditions of a low pressure created on the ground surface. Many of the times, this low pressure can intensify and take the form and the shape of an extratropical depression or a wave cyclone or a frontal cyclone. So this low pressure can intensify. No, this is not thermally induced. This can intensify into temperate cyclones. Okay, it can basically intensify into temperate cyclones. So here you will have option 3, which is correct. So here, which of the above statements given, which of the statements given above is or are correct? So the answer in that case will be 1 and 3 only. So the answer will be C. Okay, again, a very conceptual portion. Now, a question with regards to environment and ecology. Which one of the following options is incorrect? Incorrect with reference to black carbon. Now, what do we mean by black carbon? So, black carbon is a variety of a solid aerosol, so to say. Right? It is a kind of a solid aerosol, which basically means that these are very, very small particles, very tiny particles having a size in terms of micromillimeters. And there, these particles, they are basically emanated when you have hydrocarbon, which is partially burnt. So whenever you burn anything, right? Be it dry grasses, or be it even in your kerosene lamp when you burn it up. And if you observe, very tiny black particles, they start depositing themselves in the vicinity. Those tiny particles, which is very powdery, that is what is black carbon. Now, that black carbon is emitted significantly when you have the vehicles which run on fossil fuels, which undergo or undertake the combustion of fossil fuels, thereby producing a kind of an output. So there, black carbon and its dominance is quite perceptible. Now, this black carbon, by the way, does not end up remaining in the atmosphere for a very long period of time. It is carried away by the wind, it dissipates, and it is also brought down by precipitation. But then, this black carbon, when it is released, oftentimes, for example, in the case of India, we have in the northern part of the country huge amount of pollution, due to which you have significant quantum of black carbon which is released into the atmosphere. Now, that black carbon which is prevalent in the atmosphere, that ends up depositing and forming a layer in the icy cold regions of the Himalayas. Now, when these black carbons get deposited on the icy peaks, thereby they change the reflective quotient of the surface, and they end up absorbing more amount of heat because they are darker in color. So that leads to quicker melting of ice and glaciers and snow in the region of Alps, in the region of Himalayas. Everywhere this phenomena is observed. Now let us take a look at the option given and let us find out which amongst them is incorrect. So it is the complex mixture of particulate matter resulting from the incomplete combustion of fossil fuels and hydrocarbons. This is a correct statement. It generally lasts long in the atmosphere because of its ability to absorb light as heat. This is incorrect, right? This is the incorrect statement. Why? Because when we talk about black carbon, it is a very short living and a short lasting particulate matter into the atmosphere. It is brought down by the rains, it is basically blown away by the wind and brought to the ground again. So here, generally black carbon exists in the atmosphere for a few days or maybe a couple of weeks at max, not more than that. So here, that is the correct answer, right? The other options: deposition of black carbon in the Arctic decreases the Earth's ability to reflect the warming rays of the sun. This is again a correct statement. Why? Because it will lower the albedo. Being darker in color, it will reduce the albedo, meaning it will absorb greater amount of heat. Black carbon is always co-emitted with other particles and gases, which can basically have a cooling effect on the climate. Now, this is also correct. Even though black carbon has got a warming effect, many of the times during the combustion of the fossil fuels and during the vehicular emissions, you also have release of various different gases, for example, SO2. Now, this sulfur dioxide, it combines with water. Combines with water, and that leads to formation of aerosols. And they reflect sunlight. And whenever sunlight is reflected by any purpose, by any agent, by any process, that brings about a phase of cooling. Phase of cooling. Okay? That brings about a phase of cooling. So yes, the fourth statement will also be correct in this case. So the incorrect statement is option or the statement B. Okay? Bhanu, troposphere contains the majority of the mass of the entire atmosphere. In this sentence, mass refers to weight. Okay, right? When Hoshiar, then why CO2 has the second highest global warming potential? See, global warming potential has got nothing to do with how short lived or long lived it is, right? What is the ability to reflect and re radiate back the amount of terrestrial radiation that is present? And also, yes, sometimes the long lived materials, they are able to persist for a longer period of time, but overall you have to understand that there is a greater amount of consistency and presence of carbon dioxide which is released in the atmosphere as compared to the other greenhouse gases. That is why it has got a greater global warming potential. Okay, now then we move on to the other question. Cooling effect on atmosphere, Anjali, is a literal translation. Something which does not lead to warming, something which brings about a cooling phase, which is experienced naturally as well. When you have volcanic eruptions, there also sulfur dioxide is released, and that also provides cooling to that localized area. Pravaj, not all aerosols, they cause warming. Few of the aerosols, for example, black carbon, they will cause warming, right? If you have nitrate based aerosols, they will cause warming. But sulfate based aerosols, they become whitish and brownish in appearance, and they end up re-radiating back or reflecting the solar rays. That is what provides the cooling. Okay. Now, which of the following statements is incorrect with reference to eutrophication? Now, what do we mean by eutrophication? Eutrophication is that process whereby any water body that gets overloaded with nutrients. Okay, so when we talk about eutrophication, so this is about water body gets overloaded with nutrients. Now, which kind of nutrients are we talking about? So we are talking about the nutrients such as nitrogen, phosphorus, right? So these are where you have a kind of a nutrient overload. Now, when these nutrients, they start dominating in the water body, then what happens? Then, as a result of the enrichment by these nutrients, especially in the shallow waters, you observe a kind of a sudden and rapid growth of microorganisms such as algae. Now, due to the sudden dominance and prevalence of algae, that is phytoplanktons and their population increases. Phytoplanktons and their population ends up increasing. Now, when this increase happens, obviously, a lot of phytoplanktons will die as well. Now, when the phytoplanktons, they die in large quantities, they settle down at the bottom in general. And you have various different types of microorganisms which work upon the decomposition of these matter. While carrying out the process of decomposition, they end up consuming all the oxygen which is present in the water. And the water then becomes devoid of oxygen, or in other words, the water turns hypoxic. Right? It becomes devoid of oxygen. That is why suddenly, in many of the polluted lakes, you will find that suddenly you will have a large number of dead floating fish which appear on top of the surface all of a sudden. Why? Because the oxygen content would have reduced significantly. In this process of decomposition, they also end up reducing the pH value of the water, and they end up making the water more acidic. This, when taking place in the region of the oceans, this is what is also referred to as acidification and leads to acidification as well. Okay, so that is something which is experienced in this situation. Now, here, let us take a look at the option statements and let us understand which of them is incorrect. So eutrophication results due to the increased concentration of plant nutrients. That is correct. Which plant nutrients? We have nitrogen and phosphorus. So this is a correct statement. Eutrophication results in the occurrence of hypoxia. Hypoxia refers to a lack of oxygen. When you don't have enough oxygen in the water, that is hypoxia. So that is again correct. Then eutrophication results in the increase in the pH value of the seawater. This is incorrect. Why? Because it leads to the decrease in pH. Okay, so this will be the correct answer. Eutrophication results in enhanced production of primary producers. Yes, phytoplanktons being one of the primary producers, their population significantly improves and increases. So that is also a correct statement. So you have option C, which is incorrect. Why? Because it leads to acidification rather than alkalinization. So that is why C is the correct answer in this case. Okay, now which of the following statements again is incorrect with reference to the inversion of temperature? Now, what do we say, or when is it that we refer to as temperature inversion happening? So, under normal conditions, what we observe is a positive lapse rate. Under normal conditions, you have warmer air near the surface and colder air on top, right? This is what is also referred to as a kind of a positive lapse rate. Now, when we consider or when we talk about the conditions of a temperature inversion, there what you have is you have colder air or cooler air at the base and you have warmer air which is trapped at the top. So you have a kind of a negative lapse rate. So that is why this is where you have cooler air at the bottom and warmer air at top. Now, this kind of arrangement of air is also what is referred to as stability. Air attains stability. Stability means there is a significant lack of vertical mixing. Lack of vertical mixing of air. Okay. So here you will observe in the case of temperature inversion, colder air which is situated closer to the ground surface. So now let us analyze the options which are given. A long winter night with clear skies and still air is an ideal situation for temperature inversion. This is correct. Why? Because when you have a long winter night with clear skies and still air, that means the surface will be able to lose heat in a continuous fashion for a prolonged duration and terrestrial radiation will be lost. If you have had a cloud cover, that terrestrial radiation would be reflected back to the Earth's surface and would have reheated the Earth's surface. But in this case, because you don't have the persistence or the presence of a cloud cover, all the heat will be lost. So the surface will cool down very significantly faster. And when the surface cools down at a very fast speed, what is the consequence of that? As a direct consequence, you observe a scenario where the air in contact with the surface also cools down and you experience a kind of a surface inversion. So this is correct. Now, fog is often seen in the region where the inversion of temperature takes place. Now, this is also correct. Why? Because when you have the process of inversion happening, near the ground surface, you have colder air which is present. Now, whenever you have colder air which is present, and as the surface cools down further, the air eventually loses temperature, and when the air cools down, it gains saturation and eventually undergoes condensation. And there you have the formation, in this case, in the normal situation, you have the formation of a simple radiation fog which is observed. So this is also correct. Temperature inversions lead to the earth becoming warmer than the air above it. Now, this is incorrect. Why? Because in the conditions of temperature inversion, here you have cooler air. So the surface becomes cooler. Above it, you have warmer air. So this will be the correct answer. Over polar areas, the temperature inversion is normal throughout the year. That is correct. Because when we talk about the polar regions, the surface temperature is so low that the air temperature immediately above it will also be very less. So that is why under normal circumstances, also in the polar areas, you will experience a conditionality of inversion. So this is also correct. So here the answer is C. Okay. Now, then consider the following statements with reference to tides. Now, what are tides? Tides are the vertical induced movement in the large water bodies like seas and oceans, where the height undergoes a change. Now, tides are basically brought about as a consequence and a result of two variable forces. Which are those two variable forces? You have gravitational pull, gravitational pull of what? Gravitational pull of sun and moon. And the second force which is responsible for the formation of tide is basically the centrifugal force. Centrifugal force, which develops as the planet rotates around the sun or revolves around the sun in an elliptical orbit. You have a centrifugal force which ends up developing. So here, that is where you have the tides in existence. Now, you have two distinct quality of tides which are experienced. In one of the situation, you have the height of the tides to be significantly higher. Now, that is experienced when you have the sun, the earth, and the moon, when they are arranged in a straight line or in a straight plane. Let's suppose we consider the different areas. Let's suppose we consider this to be the sun. We consider this to be the earth. And let's say we consider this to be the moon. Now, in that situation, the gravitational force of both the sun and the moon will add on to each other. Even if the moon is situated in this place, that also brings about an addition of the gravitational force, due to which the high tides will be much higher than normal. So this is a condition which we refer to as, or these kinds of tides are what we refer to as spring tides. This is what we have, spring tides. Now, in this, you have the moon, the earth, and the sun on the same axial plane. Now, such a kind of arrangement of position where all the sun, the earth, and the moon, they are across the same plane, that positioning is what is referred to as syzygy. That positioning is what we refer to as syzygy, right? Syzygy is what leads to the conditioning of spring tides. But then after every 7 days, you have the positioning which changes. So let's the positioning of the moon which changes. So let's suppose this is the earth. Let's suppose here you have the sun, right? And when the moon reaches here, that is perpendicular. This is a position of which is referred to as quadrature. Now, in this position of quadrature, the lunar gravitational pull cancels out the solar gravitational pull induced on the planet. So, as a result of that, the height of the high tides lowers quite sufficiently. So, that is where you have the spring tides. And after 7-day interval from the spring tides, you have the neap tide. Again, after this is what is referred to as a neap tide. Again, after 7-day interval from the neap tide, you will have the condition of a syzygy, and again you will experience a kind of a neap tide or a spring tide in existence, then neap tide, then spring tide, and like that it moves ahead. Okay, syzygy is the positioning when you have, or the arrangement when you have the earth, the sun, and the moon on the same axial plane. There also, when the moon is placed on the other side of the planet earth, that is a position which is referred to as apposition. And When moon is situated on the same side as the sun, that is the position which is referred to as conjunction. Okay. So both conjunction and opposition, they lead to the existence of a spring tide. Okay. And quadrature is when they are arranged at a vertical 90-degree plane where the lunar gravitational pull and the solar gravitational pull cancels out each other. Now, during spring tide, the sun and the moon are at right angles to each other. This is incorrect. Why? Because it is during neap tides when they are perpendicular or at right angles. So, one is incorrect. Wherever you find one, eliminate that. So that means either option 2 is correct or option 3 is correct. Both of them cannot be correct. Now, there is a 7-day interval between the spring tides and the neap tides. So this is correct. So we know that 2 is correct. So regardless of whatever the option 3 might be, option 3 will be incorrect depending upon the options that we have. So the time between the high tide and the low tide, when the water level is falling, that is referred to as a flow. This is incorrect. Because when the water level is falling in between the high tide condition and the low tide condition, that is what is referred to as, very good, that is referred to as ebb. And when you have the water level which is increasing from low tide to high tide, from low tide to high tide, when the water level is increasing, that is what is regarded as flow. Okay. So the third statement is also incorrect, which means option B2 only is the correct answer in this situation. Now, the next question. Which of the following are hot local winds? So as you would have heard from me as well multiple times, that this is where UPSC has asked questions before multiple times. That which of the winds, local winds, they are cold, which of them are warm in character. Now, out of all these, the one which we are most familiar with, that is Lu. Lu is a local wind which blows during the afternoon, during the early evenings, in the summer season, in the northern part of the country. So Lu is very prominent. So obviously, Lu is going to be a warm local wind. So wherever option 4 is not present, eliminate that. Now, starting with Fohn, Chinook, and Mistral. Now, where is it that we experience Fohn? In which part of the world do we experience Fohn? Alps. Very good. So here, this is observed in the leeward side of Alps. Now, on the leeward side of Alps, you have sinking air, Now, this sinking air undergoes compression and warming, which increases the temperature in the region around Switzerland and the Swiss Alp region, and that is what makes the autumn conditions very favorable. It allows for early sowing of wheat, early harvest of grapes as well, and many other fruits. That is why Switzerland is also referred to as a kind of a climatic oasis, because all around it, it is very cold conditions, but Fohn gives a warming effect. So one is correct in this case. So wherever 1 is not present, eliminate that. So the answer can be 1, 2, 4 and 1, 2, 3, 4. So 2 is there. Now, where is it that you experience Chinook? Chinook is experienced on the leeward side of Rockies. Very good. Leeward side of Rockies. The same phenomena, the same principle is what is involved in the process. So that is where you have the sinking air, and that brings about compression and warming. And this is where Chinook is also referred to as snow eater. Right? Why? Because it leads to melting of the snow in these high latitudes. So this is also correct. So 1, 2, and 4 is correct. What about 3? Mistral. Now, where is it that you experience Mistral? In which part of the globe? No, Sugna. Sirocco is associated with red blood rain. Very good. Beautiful. So Mistral is observed in the region of southern Europe, right? It blows from the region of around Spain and France to Mediterranean. When? During the winters. Why? Because during the winters, we know that the land gets much colder. So this is where you have a development of a high pressure. Water body comparatively is warmer. So Mediterranean will experience a comparative low pressure. And that is what drives the winds from the region of southern Europe to the region of Mediterranean. Oftentimes it is so cold, it brings the temperature below freezing point. So the option 3 is incorrect because it is a cold local wind. Cold local wind. Okay. So here the answer will be 1, 2, and 4. That is the correct answer in terms of hot local winds which are present and prevalent. Okay. Now, after that, which one of the following statements is correct with reference to global warming? Now, this is an easier question. So why have we taken this up for discussion? This is to tell you that nowadays this is the pattern in terms of arrangement of the options and the option statement, where UPSC makes the option statement so elongated and almost all the option statements are very, very same and similar. It is just one or two words in that option statement which is replaced, and that changes the virtual meaning of the entire statement. So that is where you have to focus on this. Okay. Now, here it is with reference to global warming. Now, it is primarily caused by greenhouse gases absorbing longer wavelengths of incoming infrared radiation of the sun. Now, when we talk about the portion of global warming, why does it happen? I'm sure you would be aware of this simple concept by now. So let's suppose you have the planet. Let's suppose this is the atmosphere, right? Let's suppose here you have the sun. Now, the sun being very hot means it radiates shortwave radiation. Because the sun has got very high amount of energy, whenever the energy is high, it leads to shortwave radiation. And whenever energy is low, it leads to long wave. So the earth surface, after getting heated up, it starts radiating long wave radiation. Some of it is lost into the space, but majority of it is trapped by the greenhouse gases and returned back to the surface, allowing the surface to maintain heat. So this is what is long wave terrestrial radiation. That is what is trapped. Okay, that leads to global warming. So the first statement is incorrect, right? Then it is primarily caused by greenhouse gases absorbing shorter wavelengths of infrared radiation emanating from Earth. Now, here observe, just this term has been changed, right? Few of the terms are being changed here, and that is what changes the meaning. So from the Earth's surface, you have long wave terrestrial radiation which is released. So this is also incorrect. It is primarily caused by greenhouse gases absorbing longer wavelengths of infrared radiation emanating from the Earth, which we refer to as the terrestrial radiation. So that is trapped, that is reflected, and that reheats the surface of the Earth. So option C will be the correct answer. Okay, this is where many of the candidates will commit mistakes, and that mistake will not happen because you don't know the concept. In such kinds of questions, mistakes happen because of lapse of concentration. See, please understand, prelims is not only about the knowledge that you have. If that would have happened, everybody with a good preparation would have gone through prelims. Why is prelims referred to as unpredictable? Because you never know in that 2 hour duration if there is a lapse of concentration, even for 2 to 3 questions. That can mean the difference between night and day. That can mean the difference between you appearing for the mains exam and you preparing for one more cycle. So always pay full attention. That is why the test series are useful, because it helps you condition your mind to be able to concentrate for that duration of 2 hours. Now, with reference to the black corals recently in the news, consider the following statements. So basically, black corals are a specific species of corals. Now they are in news because recently you have had discoveries of black corals in the region of the Coral Sea and the region of Great Barrier Reef of the coastline of Australia. Now these black corals, they are named as black corals because their skeleton is black, right? The outer exoskin that is present, that has got various different coloration, but the skeleton is black. Now these corals, they are basically filter feeders. When we talk about filter feeders in the case of the water, what does it mean? It means the small and the tiny nutrients which keep on floating along with detritus, etc., that is consumed and nourishment is gained. So they are not always dependent on the presence of sunlight. Why? Because here, zooxanthellae, photosynthesis, everything is out of the question. So that is why these black corals, they can be found on shelves, on continental shelf, and in deeper waters as well. Right. So that is where they don't always need the presence of light. So obviously, they don't have any kind of symbiotic relation with zooxanthellae as well. Now, their presence is restricted to deep oceanic waters. Restricted. Why would their presence be restricted only to deep oceanic waters? Whenever you find such kind of terms, absolute terms, only, always, never, always look at those statements with a kind of a suspicion. You have high probability of that going incorrect. So here, presence is restricted to deep oceanic waters. That is incorrect because they can be found even in the shelf regions. Now, then these do not have a symbiotic relationship with zooxanthellae. That is correct. Why? Because these are filter feeders. These are filter feeders. Okay. They are threatened by illegal harvesting for jewelry. So that is true. There's a large amount of illegal harvesting of these black corals because they are in huge demand out in the market. Now, these black corals, they also are utilized for medicinal purposes, for medicinal research, and also for the kind of harvesting and requirement for jewelry making. So here, the third statement that you see, that is also correct. So how many statements given above is or are correct? So the answer will be B. That is only 2 statements. 2 and 3 are correct, whereas 1 is incorrect. Okay. Now, then after that, which of the following statements are correct with reference to cold and warm front? Now, when we say a cold front or a warm front, what is the difference between them? In the condition of a cold front, when we say a cold front is in existence, whenever we say a cold front is in existence, here cold air is active and moves forward. Now, Then in the case of warm front, warm air mass is active. So suppose in a particular area, let's say when you have a cold front, so the cold air which marches ahead, which is very, very active, it will violently upthrow the presence of the warm air. So the warm air in that region will be suddenly thrown upwards. Now, as a result of that, what will be the pressure condition on the ground surface? When you have the warm air being suddenly thrown upwards, what will be the condition of pressure on the ground surface? Correct. Here on the ground surface, because you have rising warm air, so you have a distinct low pressure which develops on the ground surface. Now, this rising warm air leads to condensation happening at various heights, and that leads to development of a specific kind of a very thick cloud. Which cloud are we talking about here? Beautiful. Here we are talking about cumulonimbus clouds. Cumulonimbus clouds. Now, these clouds, they cause violent, short duration rainfall accompanied by thunder and lightning. Other than that, if you take a look at the region of the cold front, for example, in the region of northern hemisphere, now cold front is generally activated as a result of the polar winds, isn't it? So, if you think about it, understand this nuance. Right. Let's enlarge this. So here you have, let's say, the equator. Now, in this region, you will have the westerlies, which are bringing warm winds from the region of the tropics. Right? Westerlies are the ones which are bringing warm winds from the tropics into the subpolar areas. Whereas, when we talk about the polar area, the polar easterlies, they bring in the cold air. Now, when the cold air advances, you will observe that in certain pockets, the cold air, where the front is formed, let's say, the cold air starts advancing in general along the direction of movement of the westerlies. That is where it ends up chasing this warm air many of the times. So that is why the general movement that you observe of the cold front, the general movement is northwest to southeast. Okay, that is the general movement. Now, what happens in the case of a warm front? When you have a warm front, warm air is more active. Now, when the warm air is more active in the region where you have the cold air, the warm air very slowly and steadily climbs up. As a result of that, in that larger area, it will form layers of distinct clouds such as nimbostratus, stratus, altostratus, cirrostratus, etc. And it will cause a prolonged weather phenomena of a prolonged rainfall. Okay? But the rainfall will be steady, moderate in intensity. Okay? Now let us analyze the option statements one by one. So, the direction of movement in general is from west to east of cold fronts. Correct. Warm fronts bring severe rainfall or thunderstorms. This is incorrect. Why? Because these are the ones which bring in, basically, this is brought by cold front, not the warm front. Cold fronts move faster as compared to warm fronts. This is true because the density of the air is so significant, and cold fronts are driven from a thermal high pressure which any day is much stronger as compared to the dynamic high pressure of the tropics. So that is where, and in the region of the poles, you have very low temperature. So that high pressure is continuously being reinforced, leading to a movement of the cold air mass. So 3 is also correct, right? So wherever 2 is given, first of all, eliminate 2. Wherever option 2 is given. Now you know that 2 is incorrect. So once you eliminate every option where 2 is given without even knowing option 3, you get the correct answer. But nonetheless, we have seen that option 3 is correct. Fourth statement. Cold fronts are increasingly associated with moderate and long-lasting weather patterns because you have layering of clouds formed across a larger distance. So this is basically incorrect here. It has to be warm fronts. Warm fronts are associated with moderate and long-lasting weather patterns, not the cold fronts. So the fourth statement is incorrect. So the answer will be A, that is 1 and 3 only. Okay? Now, consider the following statements with reference to the biodiversity hotspots. Now, when we talk about biodiversity hotspots, these are specific areas which end up getting significant amount of protection as well. So here, a region must have more than 1,500 fauna species as endemic to be declared as biodiversity hotspot. Now, first of all, before anything else, what is the meaning of endemism or endemic? Endemic refers to a particular species which is found typically only in that region and nowhere else. That is what makes the species endemic to that region. Okay. Now, a biodiversity hotspot must have more than 1,500 faunal species. This is incorrect. Why? Fauna represents animal. In the case of the declaration as a hotspot, you require 1,500 vascular plant species, right? So 1,500 vascular plant species. Okay? Endemic does not mean about to be extinct. Endemic means typically found only in that area and not in any other part. All the global biodiversity hotspots are located within the tropical latitudes of both hemispheres. Now, here you have another absolute terminology, that is all. So, all the global biodiversity hotspots are located within the tropical latitudes of both hemispheres. So, this is incorrect. Even within India, if you consider you have certain biosphere reserves, for example, the Nanda Devi Biosphere Reserve, which is situated beyond the tropics, right? So you have many of them, Mediterranean Reserve, etc. They are situated beyond the tropics. So this is also incorrect. Now, the Critical Ecosystem Partnership Fund is responsible for protecting the world's biodiversity hotspots in developing countries and transitional economies. This is basically correct. This is CEPF. So when we talk about CEPF, right, this is virtually and basically Critical Ecosystem Partnership Fund. Now, this fund was established in the year 2000, and this involves the partnership of many different countries. For example, it involves the partnership of or the present important role of French Development Authority, French Development Authority. Then other than that, European Union, Then other than that, government of Japan is also involved. Then other than that, you have the World Bank which is involved. Then other than that, you have the Conservation International which is involved. Conservation International is involved. Then other than that, you also have the involvement of GEF, a Global Environmental Facility, which is the funding mechanism behind United Nations Framework Convention for climate change, to combat desertification, for Convention on Biological Diversity. For all of that, GEF is a funding agency. So that is also involved in this fund. Now, this partnership fund is basically to augment and increase and facilitate the capacity building of the local population in these developing areas so as to make them as valuable partners in the process of conservation of the biodiversity and biodiversity hotspots. Because unless and until the local community starts participating, conservation will never be sustainable. So that is why you have to make them a member and a important stakeholder in the entire process. So the third statement is correct. So how many statements given above is or are incorrect? You have B, that is only 2 statements given above are incorrect. Okay. Now, then, now this CPF, you can always recall it for your prelims. So see guys, that is the main purpose of appearing for the test series. Test series is not about appearing and attempting only those questions which I know. From these test series, if there are 100 questions, there are 400 different option statements. All of these option statements should act as a source of information for you guys. Okay, so in a particular test series, you have 400 different sources of information. Whenever you commit a mistake, see, the ideal approach when you are approaching the test series, if you want to have value addition in your life, in your for your examination preparation as well, what I would always advise you is that prepare a kind of a short notes after the test. After you have analyzed the test, obviously you will commit many mistakes. In the initial days, the mistakes will be high, and in many of them the mistakes will be because of lapse of concentration. That is something which you can improve, but many mistakes will be primarily because you don't have the knowledge of that info or that area. So what you should do is, in that A4 sheet paper, jot down in small sentences those bullet points which you know or which you have come to know for the first time while appearing for the test. Many of the factual information you would not know, for example, even in history, even in geography, even in science, even in environment. Jot them down. And ideally, it should be restricted within a couple of A4 sheets. After you have appeared for the entirety of the test series, you have to only revise those particular A4 sheet paper. And that will give you enough amount of additional information. Now, many of the times we get a question correct, even though we did not know all the options, somehow, by some logic, by some grace of God, we get the option correct. That also you note down. Anything that you did not note it down, and then revise it during the month starting from April. Start revising it multiple times, and you will find that by the time that you approach the exam hall, you will be much more confident, and your source of information will be much varied and much elaborate as compared to your competitors. So always follow this approach. Consider the following statements with reference to the heat budget of the earth. Now, when we talk about heat budget, it is a kind of an accounting of the incoming shortwave solar radiation and the outgoing long wave terrestrial radiation. Okay, so the earth receives insolation in the shortwave form and radiates energy to the atmosphere in the long wave form. This is correct, right? Now, snow covered surfaces have low albedo. Snow covered surfaces have low albedo as compared to vegetation covered surfaces. This is incorrect. Why? Because when we talk about the snow covered surfaces, there the albedo is very high. Albedo, you would know, is basically between, what is the value of albedo? Generally, it is between 0 to 1. In the case of the snow covered surfaces, the albedo is close to around 0.8, right? Roughly around 0.8, 0.85. Whereas when we talk about vegetation covered surfaces, oftentimes the albedo value is between 0.15 to 0.2. Okay, that is what you will find as a distinct characteristic. So second is incorrect, first is correct. That makes answer as A1 only. Okay, now, which of the following pollutants belong to the category of secondary pollutants? Now, UPSC had asked this question once. UPSC had given the incorrect answer in its answer sheet, in its the solution set that it released. So please, when you take a look at that previous year question, don't base your study based upon that. UPSC also is prone to committing errors, but it is a different matter. When UPSC commits errors, you cannot point them out, can you? and you simply accept the fate. Because by the time the UPSC will release its solution set, people who would have to qualify, they would have qualified the interview. People who would have failed in the prelims or the mains, they would already be preparing for the prelims, which would be approaching in a week or two. So that is why by that time, nobody bothers anymore significantly. But UPSC has mentioned this option as incorrect in the solution set earlier. So be very, very attentive. Now, when we talk about the category of secondary pollutants, you have to understand that pollutants are basically classified into two types: primary and secondary. What are primary pollutants? These are the ones which are directly released, right? From the point sources, these are directly released into the atmosphere. For example, carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, right? Nitrogen dioxide, nitrous oxide, all of these is directly released. So they will be primary pollutants. In many of the cases, few of the primary pollutants, they end up interacting and reacting with each other to form complex compounds. And those are what are referred to as secondary pollutants. So here, ozone. Can ozone be produced directly as a source of pollutant? No. This is basically a secondary pollutant, right? It is oftentimes produced. Now, when we are talking about this ozone, we are basically talking about ground level ozone, or ozone present at the ground level. Ground level ozone. Okay. So in the case of the ground level ozone, this is basically formed as a result of the reaction with the various pollutants in the presence of oxygen near the ground surface. Sulfur oxide, it is a direct primary pollutant. So this is not a secondary pollutant. So wherever I will find two, I will eliminate that option. Persistent organic pollutants. Now, these are produced again as a result of consistent, significant amount of reaction taking place. So, here you have many volatile organic compounds along with nitrates, sulfates, they react to end up creating a persistent organic pollutant. So, 1 is correct, 3 will also be correct. So, wherever 3 is not there, eliminate that. Automatically, you have the correct answer, that is 1 and 3 only. After all, methane and carbon monoxide, they are also produced as a case of a primary pollutant. Both methane and carbon monoxide are produced as primary pollutants. Okay? So the answer in this case will be B, 1 and 3 only. Now, then, consider the following statements. This is with regards to the rate of change of temperature, the oceanic temperature. Rate of change of temperature with increasing depth of the ocean is more rapid near the equator than towards the poles. That means in the region of equator, as you move to the depth, the temperature changes drastically, whereas in the case of the poles, that is not the case. Apply your logic. In the region around equator, what is the temperature of the surface water in the oceans that you have? The temperature is roughly around 23, 24 degrees Celsius. What is the temperature at the base? Around 3 to 4 degrees Celsius. So yes, there is a rapid change. Around the region of the poles, the temperature of water is already close to around zero, right? Around 3 degree, 4 degree, 5 degrees Celsius, and at the base also it is very similar. So this statement is correct, that in the region of the poles, the temperature does not change that drastically. Now, the oceans in northern hemisphere have relatively lesser temperature than those in the southern hemisphere. This is incorrect. Why? Because when we talk about the region or the oceans in the northern hemisphere, they have a higher temperature. Why? Because of the influence of land masses. These are the water bodies surrounded very closely with land masses. That is why the heating of the land provides heating to the oceanic water as well. Now, northeast trade winds. Now I know 2 is incorrect, so I will phase out or eliminate wherever 2 is given. Northeast trade winds cause warming of the western coast of continents in the northern hemisphere. Think about it. So when we talk about a continent, let's suppose this is a continent, right? Let's suppose. Now, northeast trade winds, when they are moving like this, Basically, they will lead to piling up of water along which coastline? Along the eastern coastline. Here you will experience downwelling and increasing surface temperature. Whereas here you will experience upwelling and cooler temperature. So this is where it will be colder on the western coast and warmer on the eastern coast. So they cause warming of the western coast? Incorrect. So the answer in this case will be, which of them are correct? The answer will be A, that is one only. Parbish, the second point is basically that the oceans in the northern hemisphere, they are actually warmer as compared to waters in the southern hemisphere, because in the northern hemisphere, you will observe there is an overall predominance of land areas. And when the land areas are present, land gets heated at a much quicker rate as compared to the water body. Now, that will have its influence and effect on the water body as well. That is why oceans in the northern hemisphere indicate a slightly higher temperature. Okay. And the third statement is that the northeast trade winds, they cause warming on the western coast. Now, why is it that it will not cause warming on the western coast and it will cause warming on the eastern coast? Because as these trade winds move over the oceans, they will carry the surface water along with them. The surface water, generally being the warmest portion of the oceanic water, that ends up accumulating along with the wind closer to the coastline. So here the temperature will increase because of all that accumulation. So across the eastern coast, that is where warming will be observed. Whereas across the western coast, as the winds are offshore, they will be able to carry surface water along with them. As a result of that, the subsurface colder water that comes to the surface, and that brings about a cooling effect. That is why third is incorrect. Okay. Now, then the next question. Consider the following statements with reference to global distribution of rainfall. So here, between 45 and 65 degrees north and south of equator, right, in the temperate regions, the rain is heavier on the eastern coast than on the western coast. Rain is heavier. So again, consider a continental landmass, right? So this is talking about 45 and 65 degrees. Now, which wind is present in that region? In between 45 and 65, which kind of wind is present? Beautiful. You have the westerlies. So this is the direction of the wind. Now, this wind will be onshore across the western coastline of the continent, isn't it? Whereas it will be offshore along the eastern coastline. So it will bring rainfall where? Across the western coastline. But what does the statement tell us? The rain is heavier on the eastern coast. So this will be incorrect, right? So you know one is incorrect. Wherever you have one, straight away eliminate that. The amount of rainfall generally decreases from the region of the equator to the region of the poles. This is correct. Even if, let's say, you were confused in this, let's say you did not have an idea whether this will be correct or not, look at the options. In both the options available, 2 is given. That means 2 has to be correct. This is correct. The rainfall is more on the land masses than over the oceans of the world. Now, this is incorrect. Why? Because when we talk about the region of the oceans, here the relative humidity is always higher. Relative humidity is always going to be higher because the air mass is going to be moist. So as a result of that, quick condensation, quick formation of clouds, and occurrence of heavy rainfall will be observed in this case. So the third statement is incorrect, means the answer is C, that is 2 only. Okay. Now, then moving on to the next question. Now, this is about the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety. Now, this Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety is a part of Convention on Biological Diversity. or CBD on biological diversity. So this Cartagena Protocol, this was arrived at in the year of 2000. Okay. Now, this is basically for providing a kind of an accommodation and keeping in account for living modified organisms, the genetically modified organisms, providing them with significant amount of safety. It talks about an advanced informed agreement in place whereby the country which is importing any kind of a biodiversity plant or animal, that has to give the consent that yes, this animal can be introduced in our ecosystem. And also that virtually means that you also need to have a kind of a biosafety clearinghouse in place. That clearinghouse will provide clearance to that biodiversity to be introduced, and only then the introduction shall take place. So the protocol provides a universal standard for addressing food safety issues? Absolutely not. So this is incorrect. So wherever one is there, eliminate that. So automatically two is always going to be correct. Export of genetically modified crops such as GM mustard, right, developed in India will be regulated under the protocol. So here, this protocol deals with LMOs, living modified organisms. Living modified organisms, which basically brings into play, which brings into aspect the genetically modified species and the genetically modified organisms as well. So this is basically will be regulated under this protocol, correct. Then it establishes a virtual biosafety clearinghouse to help countries exchange information about these LMOs as well. So this will also be correct. So the correct answer in this case will be C, 2 and 3 only. Other than this Cartagena Protocol on biosafety, there is another additional protocol for this Convention on Biological Diversity. What is that additional protocol that you have? Beautiful. That is the Nagoya Protocol. Nagoya Protocol for fair and equitable access benefit sharing that you have. Okay, that was signed in 2010. Now, which of the following conditions are favorable for or in the formation of dew? So in the process of formation of dew, what conditions are favorable? So formation of dew takes place when? When you have the air near the ground surface. Air loses temperature, becomes very cold. As a result of it, reaches saturation. Saturation. After that, undergoes condensation, and the condensates are deposited on the surface. Okay. So the conditions favorable for formation of dew will obviously be those conditions which will help air to lose temperature significantly. Clear sky with strong airflow. Now, when you have a clear sky, that always helps the air to basically lose temperature because terrestrial radiation will be significant. But when you have strong airflow, any moisture which is present in the air will be dragged away, will be taken away. So dew formation won't be observed. So the first statement is incorrect. Wherever you have option 1, eliminate that. Without looking at the other options, you have the correct answer in front of you. Nonetheless, high relative humidity of the air, that means the air will be able to reach saturation at a much quicker pace. Cold and long nights means a larger amount of time available in which the earth will lose its heat, earth will cool down, and the air will cool down along with it. So that is also correct. Dew point when it is below freezing point. This has has got nothing to do with the formation of dew. In fact, when dew point is below freezing point, that leads to formation of what? Formation of, very good, frost. Okay, so 4 is also incorrect. So the correct answer will be B. Okay, yes, Stella, you could eliminate option 4 as well. Any of the options 1 or 4 could be eliminated and you could have the right answer. Strong airflow basically means a kind of a strong wind, right? Strong wind in existence. Whenever you have windy conditions, dew formation won't be observed. Now, during insolation, the air in contact with the land gets heated slowly. The heat energy absorbed due to the sun's radiation is released into the atmosphere, which causes the surrounding air to become warmer, and the upper layers in contact with the lower layers also get heated. So here, when we are talking about the heating process, the portion which is prominent here, which is always common, is that the heat transfer is taking place by virtue of being in contact. So which method is it where the heat is transferred in between the unequal temperatures by virtue of being in contact? It is conduction. Very good. So here the answer will be conduction. Here many of the candidates have committed mistakes because they have confused convection, where the heat is transferred by the movement of air. So that is where conduction will always be involved when you have contact. Convection will always be involved when you have a vertical movement of air involved. That will be convection. Okay. Now, then after that, consider the following pairs with regards to ocean currents and the oceans where you end up finding them. So here, if you will observe, West Australian current, it is present in the southern Indian Ocean, so this is correctly matched. Humboldt current, what is the other name for Humboldt current? This is what is also referred to as Peru current, isn't it? Very good. So this is what is referred to as a Peru current as well. It is present in the South Pacific Ocean, the eastern part of South Pacific Ocean. This is also correct. Gulf Stream, it is present in the western part of North Atlantic Ocean. This is also correctly matched. Agula's current. Agula's current is the oceanic current which is present where? In the region of Indian Ocean. Southern Indian Ocean across the African coastline. So this is basically incorrect. Rest of them are correct. So the correct answer will be C. That is 3 pairs are matched correctly. Now here, UPSC has asked this type of a question with regards to ocean current earlier as well. So when you are taking a look at the ocean currents with the perspective of the examination, prelims examination, always I would advise not only to take a look at the oceans where they are present, but also take a look whether you are talking about a cold current or a warm current. That also becomes vitally important. Okay? Aliza, conduction happens in solid. Okay. Land gets heated up due to conduction because land consists of solid particles. So if that would be the concept or the logic, then the solar energy which is received, that is not received by conduction. Then if the land gets heated only by conduction, how is it that the land receives solar energy? It is in the form of radiation. See, heat transfer and heat distribution happens by conduction, convection, and radiation. In the case of the atmosphere, when the land gets warmed up, then you will have certain air particles which will be in contact with the landmass. Those air particles will get warmed up. So that is the process of conduction. Now the air particles in contact with the heated air, that will also get warmed up. So that will also be a kind of a wake conduction in existence. Okay. Now, consider the following statements. The concentration of water vapor in the atmosphere cannot change freely. This is basically correct. Why? You need evaporation, precipitation, condensation to happen for the concentration of water vapor to change. It cannot randomly change without any of these incidents or events happening. Water vapor in the atmosphere generally decreases from the region of equator towards the poles. Why? That is correct. Because with the reduction in temperature of the air, the carrying capacity of the air also tends to reduce quite drastically. So the second is also correct. The absolute humidity, which is basically the weight of the air per volume of weight of moisture per volume of air, that is absolute humidity. Absolute humidity remains constant at any place on the surface of the earth. This cannot possibly be true, right? Absolute humidity, for example, over the region of Delhi, it cannot be consistent and constant. It is variable. During the daytime, during the nighttime, the absolute humidity changes many of the cases. So that is where the third statement is incorrect. Now, relative humidity is greater over the oceans and is least over the continent. So relative humidity, the amount of moisture which is present as compared to the total amount of moisture that the air can carry. So this is again correct. So here you have three statements which are correct. Option 3 is the one which is incorrect. Okay. Absolute humidity is basically when you have when you calculate the weight of the air mass or weight of water vapor present in unit volume of air. It is represented by gram per meter cube, right? So that is absolute humidity. So that will change because the quantity of vapor in a region, that is something which can change. Okay? Concentration of water vapor in the atmosphere cannot change freely. Kennedy, that is because the concentration of water vapor can change only due to the process of maybe evaporation, condensation, precipitation, etc. This cannot change randomly. Okay, so that is where one is also incorrect. Okay, now one is basically correct. Now, then which of the following conditions can be experienced during the event of an El Nino? So during the case of the El Nino, you have warmer waters where? In the region of the Eastern Pacific, along the Peruvian coastline. So movement of warm water, warm surface water from the coast of northern South America towards the West Pacific along equator is observed. This is incorrect. This is something observed during the neutral and the La Nina conditions, not during El Nino. So you know one is incorrect. Eliminate the options where one is present. Severe winter weather at high latitudes of North and South America are basically observed along with very drought and dry-like conditions in existence in the region of Indonesia and Australia as well. So anyways, 2 has to be correct. Both the options, they include 2. Longer period of heat waves in India. So whenever you have an event of El Nino, mostly it is associated and related with the lack of rainfall or lesser rainfall experienced over India during a larger duration. So that always ends up inciting some or the other kind of a heat wave in existence. So this is also correct. That means B, 2 and 3 only is the correct condition. Oftentimes, it kicks in very severe droughts, which we experience in India. Okay, so B is correct in this. Now, consider the following statements with reference to ocean salinity, the salt content which is present in the ocean. So, when we talk about the oceanic salinity, salinity does not influence the oceanic circulations in the deeper ocean. Now, salinity does not influence the oceanic circulation in the deeper ocean. This is incorrect. Why? Because due to the change in and the difference in salinity and temperature conditions, that is where we observe the initiation of a thermohaline circulation. And what is observed in the case of a thermohaline circulation? Water from the surface water from lower latitudes, they move towards the higher latitudes where their density increases because of increase in salinity and lowering of temperature. As the density increases, the water starts acting heavier. It sinks into the lower layers and then it circulates towards the lower latitude, where again it gets warmed up, becomes lighter, rises to the surface. So this movement is between low latitude and higher latitude. Okay, that is what is a thermohaline circulation. So the first statement is incorrect. Ocean salinity in polar region is more than that of a tropical region. This is also incorrect. Why? This is incorrect because the oceanic salinity generally is highest in the region of the tropics. Salinity in general is highest in the tropics. Why? Because you have lack of rainfall. Why do you have lack of rains in the tropics? Because of the existence of the subtropical high pressure belt which exists in that region. And in those latitudes, you have very high evaporation. Very high rate of evaporation. So whenever evaporation is more, salinity will increase. That is why all the very saline water bodies such as Lake Van, Dead Sea, then Great Salt Lake, all of them, they are situated and placed around the region of the tropics. So both of the statements here given are incorrect. So the answer in this case will be D. Neither one nor two are correct in this case. Okay. Now, consider the following statements with reference to the Earth's normal lapse rate. What do we mean by normal lapse rate? The rate at which the temperature changes with the rise in altitude. That is what is a normal lapse rate. So it is the rate of change in temperature observed while moving upward and downward through the Earth's atmosphere. There is no such lapse rate when you move down. It is considered when you rise, when you move up. What is the difference in terms of temperature, if there is reduction or an increase? So the first statement is incorrect. The lapse rate is considered zero when the temperature is constant with elevation. This is correct. Where do you experience this phenomena of zero lapse rate? In which area do you experience the zero lapse rate? Generally experienced in the region of, very good, tropopause. Stratopause also does give you the existence of a zero lapse rate. Then the normal lapse rate averages about 6.5 degrees Celsius of loss of temperature per kilometer in the troposphere. So this is again correct. So here you have basically only two statements which are correct. So the answer is B. Why one is incorrect? Because lapse rate, Ankur, is not about moving downwards. It is the change in temperature as you move upwards. That is what is considered to be the lapse rate. That is why one is incorrect. Consider the following statements with reference to Madden-Julian oscillation. Now, Madden-Julian oscillation is a kind of a disturbance and a traveling weather pattern. Now, in the case of the Madden-Julian oscillation, what do you experience? You experience that you have a low pressure system where you have rising air column, right? That leads to formation of very dense and thick cumulonimbus cloud, being able to cause rainfall. This air will then diverge. It will then sink. And that basically completes a circulation in existence. So as a result of that, here you will have a low pressure, and in these areas you have conditionalities of high pressure. Okay, this is a phase of, this is referred to as a phase of enhanced rainfall. Enhanced rain. Whereas the high pressure zones, they are referred to as phase of suppressed rain. There, due to the presence of high pressure, you don't experience any rainfall at all. Right? So, the entire disturbance that ends up moving in a direction of west to east and circumnavigates the planet Earth around the tropical and the equatorial areas. Within a period of around 30 to 60 days, it manages to complete one full coverage of the planet Earth. So, it is a westward moving disturbance of clouds, rainfall, winds, and pressure that traverses in the planet in the tropics. It is not westward, it is eastward moving. It moves from west to east. So the first statement is incorrect. It is associated with the phenomena of suppressed rainfall throughout its passage, because you also have the phase of enhanced rain. Wherever this phase of enhanced rain will occur or will lie, that region will receive heavy amount of rainfall. So this is also incorrect. So you have both, neither one nor two. None of them are correct. So the answer is D. Okay? Then, consider the following statements with reference to temperate cyclones. Now, temperate cyclones formed across the frontal formations in the subpolar areas and the mid latitudes. So, these are formed along a front in mid latitude between 35 to 65 degrees north and south. Absolutely correct. When you have warm and cold air mass interacting, in certain situations, the low pressure will intensify. Now, the shape of the isobars of temperate cyclone is elliptical in the northern hemisphere and circular in the southern hemisphere. Now think about it. Why will the isobars have different shape in the northern and the southern hemisphere? If the formation is happening across a front, right? So the isobars will generally form a kind of an elliptical shape across the entirety of the region of the front where the pressure is reducing. But the same will be observed in the southern hemisphere as well. Why only restricted only to the northern hemisphere? So this is incorrect. Okay, 2 is incorrect and 1 is correct. We know that. Now, temperate cyclones move from west to east. This is correct. Under the influence of what? Under the influence of westerlies. So that is where this is correct. So we have to find out which of the statements are incorrect. Answer will be B, 2 only. Okay. Ankur, but temperature does change while moving downward in the atmosphere. Yes, but that is not at a fixed rate, is it? That rise in temperature that you observe, it is never at a fixed rate. So never considered as a lapse rate. And Shiva Mahima, tropical regions are low pressure. They are basically in the subtropics. These are the regions of high pressure. These are not the regions of the low pressure. In the subtropics, that is where you have the high pressure. That is where you have a lot of evaporation and very little precipitation which happens. Okay? Now, the next question. Consider the following statements with reference to the ocean trenches. Now, oceanic trenches are the features associated with the convergent plate boundaries. This is correct. So, when you have an oceanic convergence, whenever there is an oceanic convergence, the oceanic plate as it subducts, it basically ends up distorting the other plate as well. And that is where this motion ends up creating a kind of a trench. So, always oceanic trenches, they are associated with oceanic convergence, always. Always associated with oceanic convergence, oceanic continental or oceanic convergence. Okay. The Mariana Trench is formed as the Philippine Sea Plate subducts beneath the Pacific plate. This is incorrect. Why? Because the Pacific plate, being the older and the heavier one, that is what undergoes subduction. So this is the one, heavier, older and heavier, as a result of which it undergoes subduction. The process of subduction. Okay? Now, due to high pressure and the absence of sunlight, these areas are devoid of primary producers. That is, the oceanic trenches, they don't have primary producers. That again is incorrect. Why? Because there you don't have photosynthesis which goes on, but you have chemosynthesis which goes on. So there you have chemotrophs which are present in that region. In that region, you will have the chemotrophs. These will be the prime producers, which will give supply of food and other nutrients to the benthic and the benthos species as well. So which of the statements given above is or are incorrect? 2 and 3, that is B. 2 and 3 are the ones which are incorrect. Okay? Now, which of the following factors control the regional climatic pattern? That is, they influence the climatic conditions in a region. Now, whenever you hear about the climatic pattern, there are two things that you have to consider. Which factor will end up influencing either the temperature or rainfall characteristic? Either of them, when they are influenced, that is the factor that we have to point out. So location with respect to high or low pressure center, that can influence the wind movement, which can bring rainfall. So obviously, this is important. Now, one is there. So wherever one is not present, eliminate that. Then wind pattern in a region. Wind pattern in a region can always influence temperature. And if the wind is onshore or offshore, it can influence the rainfall as well. So 2 is also correct. There is only one statement in which both 1 and 2 are correct, right? Presence of large bodies of water, that brings about a moderate climatic condition, onshore winds, rainfall. So this is also correct. Topography, that basically indicates the relief features, the type of surfaces that you have, right? Relief features, surface type, etc. So for example, depending upon the type of surface, the amount of solar insolation which is received, which is absorbed, etc. becomes different. So that is where topography also has an influence. So all the 4 factors are the ones which can control or influence the regional climatic condition in a area. Okay? Now, which one of the following options correctly describes BOMA technique recently in the news? Now, what is this BOMA technique? BOMA technique, primarily used for a long time in the region of Africa, is basically utilized in order to translocate any particular animal species from one region to another. So basically, when you have animals in the wild, the major problem and the major hurdle is how will you capture them if you want to transfer them to some other area? Capturing the animals in the wild becomes difficult for the predators, let alone for the humans. So what is done is a kind of a funnel-like enclosure is created, a large funnel-like enclosure is created. And that funnel basically narrows and eventually leads to an enclosure or a cave or a kind of a cage, right? And across that funnel, the animals are then chased, and the animals automatically go into that enclosure, that cage, and that cage is transferred from one region to another, and hence the animals are also translocated. Recently in India, around the region of Kyoladev, you had basically few spotted deers which were captured, and they were captured by this technique. That is why this technique is in use. And they were captured to be introduced where? in the region of Mukandra Hills Tiger Reserve. Because in the region of the Mukandra Hills Tiger Reserve, even though the tiger population is there, the herbivore population, the population on which the tigers will feed, that is basically dwindling. That is why Boma technique was used to capture the spotted deer and introduce them into the region of Mukandra Hills Tiger Reserve. So, what is basically this Boma technique? It is an in situ conservation method for medicinal plants. It is a technique that makes use of gene editing technology to conserve critically endangered species. It is a method of capturing and translocating animals from one protected area to another. That is correct. Okay? Now, then, consider the following pairs. Here you have the types of climate and the characteristics of that type of climate. So, Mediterranean climate. In the case of the Mediterranean climate, what is the condition that you have? The basic condition is dry summer and you have rainy winters. Dry summers and rainy winters. That is what you observe in the case of the Mediterranean. Now, occurs along the east coast of the continent in the subtropical latitude with thunderstorms in summer and frontal precipitation in winter being common. So you don't have thunderstorms in summer in the Mediterranean climate. So this is incorrectly matched. Humid subtropical climate. Climate is characterized by hot, dry summer and mild, rainy winter and occurs along the coast in southeastern and southwestern Australia. What is indicated here? This is the Mediterranean climate. So this is also incorrectly matched, right? Marine west coast climate, which is also referred to as the British type of climate. Now here, annual and daily ranges of temperature are small. The temperature is almost consistent and you receive precipitation or rainfall throughout the year. So that is what is the marine west coast climate, which is also referred to as the British type of climate. British type of climate. So that is correct. Then highland climates, which you experience in hill stations and altitude. Large changes in mean temperature occur over a short distance. This is also correct because when we are talking about an altitude, the temperature will change. Let's say when you are moving across this slope. So even if you cover a small distance, the temperature will end up decreasing drastically because of the slope that is there and the height which is gained. So in highland climate, the temperature changes very rapidly. So which of them are correctly matched? You have B, that is only two pairs. That is something which is correctly matched. Okay? Now, then, consider the following statements with reference to the difference between tropical and extratropical cyclones or tropical and temperate cyclones. While extratropical cyclones can originate over both land and sea, tropical cyclones can originate only over the seas. This is correct. Why? Because for the formation of a tropical cyclone, you do require a warm maritime air mass, and that warm maritime air mass, when rises up, it undergoes the process of condensation that releases latent heat into the air that further intensifies the low pressure and the cyclonic system develops. So the requirement of a warm maritime air mass or a tropical maritime air mass is absolutely essential for a tropical cyclone, but same is not the case for the temperate cyclone. Now, wind velocity in an extratropical or a temperate cyclone is much higher as compared to that in a tropical cyclone. This is incorrect. Even though the aerial coverage in the temperate cyclone is much larger, wind velocity is less because the pressure gradient force in comparison is slightly lesser. Unlike extratropical cyclones, tropical cyclones are fueled primarily by horizontal temperature contrast. Now, what is the meaning of horizontal temperature contrast? That basically represents the temperature difference between an area, let's say A, and the temperature difference in the region B. So this horizontal temperature contrast, that is what can give rise to a temperate cyclone. But when we have the tropical cyclone, these are basically fueled due to warm maritime air mass. Okay, in the region of warm maritime air mass, because of the warm maritime air mass. So here, basically, third statement is also incorrect. So which of them are incorrect? So you have D, 2 and 3, which is incorrect. Okay. Sudhanshu, direction of anticyclone in northern hemisphere. Think about it. Why to learn about it? So in the region of the anticyclone, you have a high pressure. In the northern hemisphere, what do you have? Winds originating from here. In the northern hemisphere, if the winds will be deviating towards their rightward direction, right? So what is the circulation of the wind pattern that you have? It will be clockwise. Okay. So anticyclonic circulation in northern hemisphere is always going to be clockwise. Now, consider the following statements with respect to photochemical smog. Now, this is a question which UPSC has asked in the prelims as well, in the mains as well. Now, photochemical smog, how is it produced? So basically, on the ground surface, when you have nitrogen oxides, when they react with volatile organic compounds, so you have nitrogen oxides, when they react with volatile organic compound. These volatile organic compounds are released by burning of fossil fuel, even in paints and varnishes that you have, your benzene, toluene, etc. All of them come under the part of these organic compounds. Now, when they react, oftentimes under the presence of sunlight and under ideal conditions, they end up producing peroxyacetyl nitrate. And that is what is referred to as PAN, not the PAN number that you have. This is the PAN, which is also which is a photochemical compound, and that is what creates the causation of the photochemical smog near the ground surface. So nitrogen oxides released from anthropogenic sources constitute a major pollutant of photochemical smog. Absolutely yes. Cities located in valleys can be more susceptible to photochemical smog than cities located in the plains. Think about it. When we talk about the region of the valleys, here, the movement of the air or the mixing of the air is very poor. So oftentimes the pollutants end up staying in the same region for a longer duration. Whereas when we talk about the plain area, the wind movement can take place. So the photochemical smog can dissipate. Whereas in the cities, the photochemical smog or these pollutants, when they get trapped in the same region for a longer duration, that leads to a reaction and the secondary pollutants getting created, and the formation of photochemical smog is much more frequent. So which of them are incorrect? You have D, that is neither 1 nor 2, because both of them are basically correct. Okay. Now, the vertical pressure gradient in the atmosphere is much larger than the horizontal pressure gradient. Yet, winds don't move straight up. The general flow of wind is not straight up. It is only when the air is rising up due to convergence, etc., where you have the upward motion. Otherwise, you have a horizontal motion of the wind. Why is it? That is primarily because now the pressure gradient vertically is significant. As you go to the greater altitude, the pressure will be lesser. As you come to the ground surface, the pressure will be higher. But still the wind does not move up because you have the gravitational pull which is acting simultaneously. So the gravitational pull along with the pressure gradient force, Coriolis force and the frictional force, these are the forces at play which in fact influence the movement of winds from one region to another. It is that gravitational pull of attraction which basically prevents the wind from escaping upwards. Okay? So here, You have, which of the following is the reason behind it? Horizontal pressure gradient is generally balanced by nearly equal, but now here we have to talk about the vertical pressure gradient, not the horizontal pressure gradient. So the first statement is incorrect. Vertical pressure gradient is generally balanced by a nearly equal but opposite Coriolis force. Incorrect. Horizontal pressure gradient is balanced by a nearly equal but opposite Coriolis force. Incorrect. The vertical pressure gradient is balanced by a nearly equal but opposite gravitational force. That will be the correct solution. Okay. Sheikh, what is the question that you are asking for which you are not getting the answer, Sheikh? Yadav, in valley, photosynthesis will be less. First of all, that is not a surety. And even if the photosynthesis is less, what does that have to do with photochemical smog? Photochemical smog is created because of the accumulation of pollutants and the pollutants reacting. So you have ground level ozone along with uh, the volatile organic compounds and the nitrates when they react, then you have the presence of PAN. So their photosynthesis does not have much role to play. Okay. Now, then, with reference to biodiversity conservation, right? Biodiversity conservation, that is under CBD. Which one of the following options correctly describes 30 by 30 target? That is conserving and preserving 30% of the land area by the year 2030, and also being able to bring 30% of the degraded land under restoration by the year 2030. So it is a proposal to protect at least 30% of the planet's land and ocean by 2030. Otherwise, there is also a 30 by 30 program under UNFCCC, and that is basically dealing with the reduction of methane emission. So that is why this is important, that when you have biodiversity conservation, there you have a separate 30 by 30 target. When you have the climate change convention, there you have a separate 30 by 30 target, which was introduced in Conference of Parties 26, which was held in Glasgow. That is where you had United States being able to introduce and push through a reduction in methane emission by 30% by the year 2030. That was a part of the methane 30 by 30 target under the portion of climate change. This is a portion under biodiversity conservation, which was recently finalized at COP15, or as per the Kunming. As per Kunming, Montreal Agreement. Okay. Yadav, pollutants react due to temperature of, in the presence of sunlight, Yadav, they will basically become chemically active. So as long as sunlight is prevalent, they will undergo that kind of a reaction. Okay. Now, then consider the following pairs and they are related to. So Basel Convention, control of transboundary movement of hazardous waste and their disposal. Correct. Then you have Stockholm Convention, to protect human health and pollutants from the effects of persistent organic pollutants such as insecticides, pesticides, herbicides, etc. So this is also correctly matched. Talanoa Dialogue. Now this Talanoa Dialogue was basically initiated under Conference of Parties 23, when it was for which? For United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, when this was held in 2018 under the presidency of Fiji. That is when the Talanoa Dialogue was initiated, and this was basically to ensure or to take a stock of the fact that what is the progress in terms of the Paris Agreement, because Paris Agreement was supposed to be implemented by the year 2019. That is why that Talanoa Dialogue became important. So here This is also correct, taking stock of the progress of climate action since Paris Agreement adoption. Then Rotterdam Convention to ban the movement of radioactive waste between nations. So, Rotterdam is not about radioactive waste. It talks about a prior informed consent to be in place for hazardous materials to be transferred from one region to another, but does not include the conditions of a radioactive waste. So, 4 is incorrect. 1, 2, and 3 are correct. So, you have 3, that is, 3 pairs are correctly matched. Okay. Now, which of the following options correctly describes Sujalam 2.0 campaign? So this is a campaign which has been launched by the Jal Shakti Ministry, and Jal Shakti Ministry has launched this campaign particularly to culminate or provide the Swachh Bharat Abhiyan Grameen Yojana and take it to the next level of success, whereby there is a condition for the treatment of, or the aim is to treat grey water. Now, what is grey water? Grey water is a basic kind of a wastewater that is generated when you have detergents, when you wash your utensils in the kitchen, when you have. So, it is not the absolute sewage water, but it is a water which can be treated, right? So, soap water, etc., laundry water that you have, that is what is grey water. So, it is a decentralized program for the grey water management. Now, when you come across such kinds of questions, and you will come across such kinds of questions in the test series, ideally, your job is not only to know what is the correct answer, your job is to know which ministry has launched it, under what program and provision has it launched it, where has that launching been taking place. So this is basically launched by the Jal Shakti Ministry in order to make the Swachh Bharat Abhiyan Grameen more successful. Okay, that is what is grey water. Shrikant, grey water is basically a kind of a polluted water, but not that kind of an absolute pollution in terms of the sewage, but the kind of water that you get from your kitchen, from your laundry, etc. That is the wastewater. So, in order to manage that, in order to restore that and recycle that, that is where, and have a separate storage for these, that is where you have the Sujalam campaign. Now, consider the following statements with reference to cloudbursts. Cloudbursts are natural phenomena where the clouds, they become so unsustainably large that they are unable to hold themselves together anymore, and they cause sudden and incessant downpour, which can always lead to flash flood conditions as well. So during a cloudburst, the relative humidity and cloud cover are at their maximum level. Correct. Mountainous regions are more prone to cloudburst. Absolutely correct. Whereas they are absent in the plains. This is incorrect. Under certain conditions of intense low pressure in the region of the plains, where you have low pressure, that will bring about a vertical updraft of air that can also end up making the clouds unsustainably large. So, which of them are incorrect? That is where you have to pay attention. So, which is incorrect? That is B. 2 only is the incorrect one in this case. Okay. Now, which of the following option correctly describes the term aquamation? Aquamation is basically a derivative of cremation, right? When you cremate a body. But rather than burning, here what is done is, in the presence of certain very strong alkali, body is enclosed in a kind of cylinder, a closed cylinder, and then it is heated up till the temperature of around 150 degrees Celsius. So automatically the entire body is dissolved, and you are left behind with certain water residues and certain bones. So that is a greener methodology of cremating a body without causing pollution. So that is why it is also referred to as chemical cremation or aquamation. Okay, so it is a green cremation process which makes use of alkali to eventually to accentuate the breakdown of organic materials. That is what is meant by aquamation. Okay, it is enclosed in a cylindrical object, and then it is heated up till the temperature of close to around 150 degrees Celsius. Okay. Afreen, how many questions will be discussed more? Roughly around 5 more questions. It is a part of the large scale ocean circulation that is driven by global density gradients created by surface heat and freshwater fluxes. It continuously replaces seawater at depth with water from the surface. Means what? Surface water is going to the depth, and water at the depth is rising to the surface. In which kind of circulation did we observe this just now? Thermohaline circulation. And slowly replaces surface water elsewhere with water rising from the deeper depths. So this is where you have a circulation of water from the lower latitudes to the higher latitude, owing to the difference of density in water, and then that water rises back up. That is what is thermohaline circulation. So the answer will be thermohaline circulation. Yadav, amok is a kind of a thermohaline circulation. The basic phenomena is thermohaline. Which of the following are the reasons for the increase in human wildlife conflicts in India? Now, human wildlife conflicts happen why? Whenever you have a loss of habitat, fragmentation of habitat in terms of biodiversity, that is when the human wildlife conflict happens. Oftentimes, you will come across the news stories that the elephant has entered into the farmland or the field, creating a kind of a havoc. That is a human wildlife conflict. So, increase in habitat loss, obviously, that will drive the animals closer to the settlement. Even you would have heard the news story that you have many leopards now roaming around the region of Bangalore. So that basically means they have been driven to the urban areas because of lack of natural habitat. Growth in population of wild animals in certain cases, that is also correct. Change in cropping patterns. Oftentimes, you end up growing certain crops such as sugarcane, which again attracts hordes of wildlife and animals to the farmland, creating a man-animal conflict. Now, there is only one statement, only one option available where 1, 2, and 3 are correct. In rest of them, 1, 2, and 3 together, they are not correct. But nonetheless, growth of invasive alien species. Now, in many of the forested area, you have certain invasive alien shrubs or plants which have been growing significantly and rapidly. Means the available grasses which are present, which are used for by grazing animals, that start getting in minority. So as a result of that, animals are driven closer to habitation in order to consume food. So this is also correct. Peri-urbanization. That is urbanization taking place in the periphery of the existing urban setup. So in the case of a semi-urban or a township kind of a situation, or expansion of the existing urban area, that also will bring about a man-animal conflict. Peri-urbanization, basically, Sudhanshu, is a kind of, in a nutshell, it can be urbanization in the periphery, that is in the surrounding. Now, in the existing urban center, let's suppose in the existing urban center, around it, if let's say you have certain forests. Now, when you go for extension of this urban center, it will slowly expand in the form of a suburb, then in the form of a small township, and so on. So that will always drive man-animal conflict. Yes, a kind of a sprawl. So the answer in this case is D. That is all are correct. If wild animals try to come into the nearby villages, it may also create human-wildlife conflict. That is when human-wildlife conflict are created, Sheikh. Human-wildlife conflict is not created when you are sitting at your home and Asiatic lion is sitting in Gujarat. Then human-wildlife conflict is not created. Either you go there or they come to your place. Only then human-wildlife conflict is created. Okay? So all the factors that we saw, that basically drives these animals towards you. That is what is human wildlife conflict. Okay. Now, consider the following pairs about the ocean relief features and the kind of topography that they represent. Continental shelf, immediately closer to the landmass, immediately in the shallow portion of the water body. So these are relatively steep-sided narrow basins that occur along island arcs and are associated with active volcanoes and strong earthquakes. This is absolutely incorrect. Continental slopes. These reliefs give way to ocean floors, and submarine canyons are also observed here. So you have the continental shelf, and then you have the slope in existence. This is where you will have the existence of submarine canyons, and this is what eventually leads to deep sea plains, or what we also refer to abyssal plains. So this is correctly matched. Then ocean deeps. These are actually oceanic trenches. So these are covered with sediments brought by rivers and possess rich resources of fossil fuels and are rich fishing grounds. This is incorrect. Actually, this describes a continental shelf, and this A describes a oceanic deep. So this is also incorrectly matched. So here, how many of them are correctly matched? You have A, only one pair is correctly matched. Okay? Now, then, these are low thunderhead clouds formed by strong convection in the atmosphere. In addition, these clouds are considered one of the main rain-producing clouds. Now here, thunderhead clouds, which cause thunder and lightning. That is the cloud which has got significant vertical development, and you have only one such kind of a cloud, that is cumulonimbus cloud. That will always end up creating a kind of a thunderstorm condition accompanied by thunder and prolonged lightning. Now, which of the statements regarding ocean current is or are correct? The flow of the current is usually slower at the ocean or sea surface and becomes faster with increasing depth of the ocean. This cannot virtually be possible because the movement is initiated and influenced by the wind pattern. So the movement is fastest at the surface and slower, significantly slower at the bottom. In lower and middle latitudes, cold currents are usually found on the west coast of the continents. So if you take the example for, suppose, California current, then Canary current, right? Then you have Benguela current. All of these are examples of cold current which exist along the western coast of the continents. So that statement is basically correct. So here, which is the, or select the correct answer. So you have B, that is 2 only, that will be correct. Okay, 1 is incorrect. So that basically brings us to the end of the discussion. And overall, if you would have looked at this entire paper, you would observe that this entire paper is significantly conceptual. Look at your basic concepts, brush up your basic concepts, and you are good to go. Okay? Now, right, did we have to choose incorrect in this case? Right, apologies, my friend. So we had to choose incorrect in this case. So in that situation, please don't commit the mistake that I did. Please be more careful in studying reading whether it is incorrect or correct. So the incorrect one will be A. Okay. Lala, how LMOs affect humans? So the LMOs, they are able to influence humans significantly. When we talk about it, for example, you have certain kinds of plants, right? They will have detrimental health problems or the detrimental impact on health. That is what you can have as an impact of LMO, right? Okay. Now, right. Abhijit, most of the answers are wrong till yet. So, should I revise the PPT again and again or read some books? Revise the PPT. I would advise you go through the tablet lectures in detail, maintain your own topic wise note, unless until you write something what you have learned without looking at the book or the PPT or the any source. Till then, it will not internalize. So do that. Once you are able to do that, then you will not be needing to guess anything. You will be able to do that with the confident. Okay. Right. So that's what I told you, that you have certain plant species. So such plant species, they are not allowed to be introduced. That is where the concept of the entire Cartagena Protocol on biosafety came into place. Otherwise, let's suppose Monsanto, the seed company, develops a seed which gives you very good yield. It is an LMO. But at the same time, let's suppose that plant, when it is consumed, it is not safe for health. So all these kinds were prevented, and their movement, their introduction was prevented under the conditions of CBD. So we don't have that prominent LMO impact on health anymore. Okay. Jitu, which cyclone will cause more violent, bomb cyclone or tropical? Bomb cyclone in itself is a violent cyclone created in the case of temperate cyclones. Okay. Tropical cyclones, however, are much more destructive because the wind movement is much more stronger. Horizontal temperature contrast, Mantesh, refers to if, let's say, temperature you are measuring in between A and B. So that temperature difference leads to initiation of a cyclone. But this temperature difference across a horizontal plane means if, let's say, this is very cold, and this is very warm. So that means here you will have the formation of a front. And that leads to development of a temperate cyclone. Okay. So that is where I'll restrict it for today, guys. Already it has been significantly delayed. And okay, Anukriti, freak waves. Freak waves are basically those anomalies where you have very large waves, whereby the wind movement which causes these waves, oftentimes it joins or becomes one with the existing ocean current. So that is where it simply amplifies in terms of magnitude, in terms of its intensity. And that is where the wave which will be generated will suddenly have a kind of a very steep fall of sorts. That leads to navigational disasters. Nivesh, intensity is a score more than how to improve it. Nivesh, I would basically suggest you that what you should do is, first of all, analyze the errors that you are doing. Never look at only the score. Classify the errors. The errors can be either due to lapse in concentration or if you don't have the information. Now, classify them. Where have you committed errors? Now, when you have basically shortlisted the areas where there is a lack of information, look at those areas. Why there is a lack of information? Has it not been covered by you? So wherever it is present, cover it up, revise it, strengthen it, and then go for the next test. So follow this approach. That will lead to improvement. Just sitting in the test never leads to improvement. Okay? Okay. Does it mean that if we have strong winds, then vapor temperature? Yes. Then you don't have the dew formation because the relative humidity of the air in itself in that region that reduces. Sudhanshu, let's clear the prelims and we'll get there. Or you can contact me by mail and we will talk about it. So that is where I'll restrict it for today, guys. Thank you for being patient enough. Thank you for being so graceful throughout. Till we meet again, take care of yourself. Make good use of this prelims test series. All the best as you prepare forward. Thank you. Goodbye and good night.